For my Moco project for computer fundamental systems, I decided to build a LAMP server with WordPress. The goal of my project was to create a easy to use web page that would be locally available to the members of my household, so they could easily access fundamental items and information that was important to the household, such as combined calendar, cleaning duties. Discussion of how my project works, some of the biggest challenges I faced, and what future improvements and direction I see for this project in the future. So to begin with, the computer that I was using for the server was the Raspberry Pi 4. You can see over here the broad specifications of it. As you can see, the Raspberry Pi 4 is not a microcontroller, however it is a system-on-chip device. So it does contain pretty much all of the self-contained functions and features of a small computer. Because of this, I was able to develop a server on it, which I have based my web page and WordPress. To be able to build this LAMP server, we had to connect the Raspberry Pi to my current PC via a serial connection using the GPIO ports found on the board. Once I've connected the GPIO ports to the PC via a USB for a serial connection, I use the application PuTTY to communicate to my board using the terminal window over here that you see. We found the COM port 7 was the port linked to the USB, and we set the speed to 11.5200. Then with that completed, I'm able to communicate with my Raspberry Pi through the command line terminal here. We logged in with username Pi and password Raspberry, and then from there we were able to begin building the LAMP server. So to begin with, the LAMP server starts with a Linux operating system. So the Linux operating system I've already previously installed onto my Raspberry Pi via a SD card, which I flashed with the Raspberry Pi Linux operating system. With that in place, I used the Apache web server kit, downloaded that onto the Raspberry Pi and installed it. So the Apache web server kit, it allows us to serve web pages on information such as HTMLs via the HTTP protocol to any other devices on that network. To check to make sure the Apache web server kit was working, the next step was to find out the IP address of the Raspberry Pi unit from which the Apache was running. And then once we found out that, we could use another device on that network to go into a browser and open that IP address to find the Apache page that was being served to that address. Now that the web server was set up and we checked to make sure it was working, the next step was to install the database, because we need a database to be able to display dynamic web pages. Otherwise, the Apache web server could be used just to display static HTML web pages. Though, since I'm looking to add WordPress to this website as well, we will need a database. So the one we've chosen is the MariaDB database. It's a forked variant of MySQL. The benefits of having MariaDB is that, one, it is fully GPL licensed, which means that it is all open source and a lot easier to access and use without having to buy the premium features that come with MySQL. To be able to effectively communicate between the database and the web server Apache, we need to install the language PHP. There is other languages you could use, like Node.js. However, for this, we've chosen PHP just for its versatility and how well compatible it is with the Raspberry Pi and WordPress systems. So PHP is a scripting language used on the server side. It helps serve dynamic content from the web server to the client. Now that PHP has been installed on the Raspberry Pi unit, we can now look at installing WordPress. So WordPress is a simple platform used for developing websites, typically blogs. However, for this instance, I'll be looking at more of a functional communication system within an internal network. WordPress was installed via terminal commands and GET requests to get the installation files from the internet directly to the Raspberry Pi unit, and then they were extracted from the zip file to the directory which our Apache was working from. With that set up, the next step was to set up our database for the WordPress to use for the dynamic content it will contain. With our database now set up and WordPress installed, it is now time to configure the WordPress page to start our web server. Now, to do this, we simply had to log in via a separate PC into the IP address of the Raspberry Pi to access the WordPress homepage. And from there, the simple configuration and startup steps to select the database we just newly created and to start picking our themes and web pages to start our website. The first main function I wanted to work on with my website, which I was now dubbing Housemate Organization and Communication. So we have our house name called the Patricia House, just for a nickname to easily identify it. So the main feature I wanted to work on was the calendar. So the purpose of this was to have everyone add their events to the calendar, and then everyone could see when people would be away and could comment, and when extra duties or other events needed to be organized or picked up. Just so we had a general understanding and communication between everyone about what was going on and what we had coming up. And so this nice calendar look over here, that was actually obtained through a plugin downloaded through WordPress itself called the Modern Event Calendar over here. And through some settings we can customize and adjust the look and feel of them. So on the left hand side here we have the dashboard, which we use to create the posts, the new pages, comments, and that way we can easily have a quick overview of the entire web page. On the right hand side you see the calendar that we had open, so I set this as our main page just because it was the bulk of the information that I was focusing on. And then future extra pages included adding new events to the calendar. So just in the next tab here you'll have the add new events, and then that way everyone can add their own events, the date, times, and then have plenty of extra functions like a countdown timer once you go into the event itself. You can even choose a color to help categorize what the event is. And then one of the next tabs, additional page would be the cleaning duties. So eventually this would probably evolve into like a chore wheel that might change weekly, so everyone's not doing the same tasks every single week. So you can see here me and my other two housemates. So just how we share the duties, and they're just weekly cleaning duties. And then the next task that I was trying to implement, but I didn't get quite to finish, was the Raspberry Pi 4 core CPU temp. So over here I was going to implement a button, and then on clicking on the button the Raspberry Pi would request or post the temperature of the CPU to the web page, and that would be easily updated and potentially even with certain graphics indicating when it was getting dangerously high for the temperature. Some of the biggest challenges I found with this project was incorporating the core temperature from the Raspberry Pi 4 into the WordPress web page. As you can see from this document here, you do have the option of inserting a code block, but connecting that with the information from the hardware unit itself was the main challenge. The future developments for this project that I see would be removing the hardware as an option. Through the use of cloud computing, we could remove the physical hardware locally and have remote cloud support systems, preferably by the software as a service platform. Use that to run WordPress, and then we could remotely program it from our local PC. Using this method, we could easily upscale or downscale, and we're not limited by the physical hardware technology that we have available to us. And it would be also a lot more accessible and a lot more versatile to be able to program and code. Some of the further software options I'd look at taking this project would be incorporating smart home technology onto the web page. So the event calendar could sync up with smart home devices. So if it knew you'd be away, you could turn off your lights. If it knew you'd be coming home at a certain time, it could turn them on in anticipation of you arriving. I also see it being linked to your Facebook or Twitter accounts, even possibly email, to give reminders of events and also general updates to be better cohesively connected to the smart home and our housemate webpage. That way we could share calendar events backwards and forwards, and this way the calendar here could automatically be uploaded with the events from Facebook as you accept them or get invited. That way it'd just be nicely, neatly all incorporated rather than checking 2 to 3 different calendars. So that's my project. It was great to learn about the technologies practically, to learn the flow and the structure of the web and how to serve a web page, all from basically a user requesting a web page in a browser through a URL that then goes to a DNS server to get the IP address, and then that server storing the dynamic information in a database and transmitting the HTML documents over HTTP protocols back to the browser to bring it into a readable format. Thank you so much for listening.